Okay, let's just get straight into it. If you're looking at the 2026 GCC construction market, severe disruptions like major supply chain blocks or sudden geopolitical risks, well, they just aren't those rare once-in-a-lifetime shockers anymore. They are the new baseline. It's literally what we're dealing with on-site every single day.
But here's the reality check, and we really need to shatter this myth right out of the gate. Force majeure, it is not some magical get-out-of-jail-free card. So the crucial point is, just because a massive disruption hits, it doesn't mean you automatically get time or money. The event itself, it gives you zero. It's actually your behavior, your administration, and your strict adherence to the contract that creates your entitlement.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving deep into what has honestly become a highly complex and, frankly, deeply misunderstood legal ecosystem in the GCC. We're going to break down the exact mechanics of force majeure as it stands right now across the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, and show you exactly how to navigate it and survive.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The 2026 GCC reality. 2. Force majeure defined strictly. 3. The integrated clause network. 4. Contractor, engineer, and employer roles. 5. The shift to alternatives. And finally, 6. Why force majeure fails.
All right, let's dive right into Section 1, the 2026 GCC reality. Right now, we are operating in an incredibly high-stakes environment, and it is driving an absolute tidal wave of construction disputes. Look at these pressures. Geopolitical instability, supply chains totally frozen up by port congestion, massive cross-border labor constraints, and just extreme material price volatility. Any single one of these could easily derail a project. And because they're squeezing us so hard, claims are absolutely skyrocketing. But here's the catch. Tribunals and courts, they are increasingly throwing these claims out. Why? Simply because parties are fundamentally misinterpreting how the force majeure clause actually works in the real world.
Which brings us to Section 2, force majeure defined strictly.
To really understand why these claims keep failing, we have to kind of pivot away from the physical chaos on the ground and look at the rigid legal baselines. At the core of the FIDIC definition, whether you're using the 1999 Red Book or the 2017 editions, is a strict four-part test. It's got to be an exceptional event beyond your control, unforeseeable, unavoidable once it hits, and not the other party's fault. But listen, the absolute key word here is cumulative. These tests are strictly and cumulatively applied in 2026 disputes. If you fail even one of those four conditions, boom, you instantly lose your entitlement. Remember, this clause protects against the actual prevention of performance, meaning you literally cannot do the work. It absolutely does not protect you just because the job got commercially difficult or way more expensive. And you know, things get even stickier when we layer local law over the contract. Under the 2026 updated UAE civil law, there's this massive, dramatic tension. On one side, Article 273 demands true impossibility, meaning the works are destroyed or legally prohibited. If you meet that incredibly high bar, the obligation is extinguished entirely. But contrast that with Article 249. That covers mere commercial hardship, where an unforeseen event just makes performance excessively onerous. This huge tug-of-war between the impossibly high bar of true impossibility and the much lower bar of commercial difficulty, well, that's the root cause of almost every major force majeure dispute in the region right now.
Let's move on to Section 3, the integrated clause network.
And this brilliantly illustrates a really fundamental concept. Force majeure is not some standalone, isolated rule. It actually operates as a highly interconnected contractual ecosystem. It's like a giant puzzle. If you want to claim force majeure under Clause 19, you have to activate all these connected wires. You need Clause 1.3 to get your valid notices out. You need 8.4 to actually secure your extension of time based on a critical path. You might even need 13.7 if, say, a new law triggered the whole mess. If you just yank the force majeure lever all by itself without mapping it to these supporting provisions, your claim is going to be routinely rejected in GCC arbitration. Absolutely no doubt about it.
Which leads us to Section 4, contractor, engineer, and employer roles.
So who actually manages all these moving parts day to day? Let's look at the contractor first. It's fascinating because treating these procedural steps as a mere formality, that's just no longer an option on modern projects. I mean, are you treating them as a formality? Step 1 requires issuing formal notice. Step 2 means you have to prove the delay actually impacted the critical path, and you need real, logic-based program analysis to back it up. Step 3 is continuously executing and documenting your mitigation efforts. Treating force majeure as a multi-clause entitlement exercise is absolutely mandatory for contractors today. You aren't just filing a claim, you are systematically building an entitlement.
I cannot stress this enough. Notice compliance is a strict condition precedent. That means if you rely on, say, a quick informal email or a casual chat on site with the employer, you are going to suffer a total loss of your rights. And it genuinely does not matter if the disruption event is 100% valid and absolutely devastating to your project. If you miss that 14 or 28-day formal notice window, your entitlement is gone. Period. Done.
Now, this whole ecosystem shifts a bit when we bring the engineer into the picture. They sit right at the absolute center of this storm, usually under immense pressure. But their mandate is crystal clear. They have to maintain quasi-neutrality. They need to look at the contractor's claim and map the event strictly to that correct clause network we just talked about. They're neutrally reasoned, strictly evidence-based critical path assessments, especially when we're talking about concurrent delays. Honestly, those assessments are often the only thing standing between a manageable project and a disastrous years-long dispute board.
Finally, we now have the employer. Listen, the days of reactive, fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants decision-making are completely over. Employers in 2026 must have structured governance. If an employer ignores a formal notice, or worse, replies with an informal WhatsApp message, they are creating a massive waiver risk that essentially hands the contractor all the power in arbitration. Employers also absolutely have to classify risks correctly. If you misclassify a legislative change under Clause 13.7 as just a general force majeure event, you can dramatically and completely unnecessarily inflate your own financial liability.
All right, Section 5, the shift to alternatives.
Now, what's really interesting about this data here is what it tells us about the 2025 to 2026 GCC dispute trends. It's actually a pretty surprising twist on how claims are really being won right now. You'd probably think with all this wild global volatility, pure force majeure claims would be going through the roof, right? But they aren't. Most successful claims in the GCC right now aren't pure force majeure anymore. Because that standard for true impossibility is just so phenomenally high, smart contractors and engineers are pivoting. They're reclassifying the disruptions into related provisions like authority delays under Clause 8.5 or legislative changes under Clause 13.7. Why? Because these alternative routes have vastly higher success rates and often give you much better cost recovery structures. It's a real game changer.
And that brings us to our final section, number 6, why force majeure fails.
When we pull everything we've talked about together, it becomes glaringly obvious what is continuing to totally destroy claims in modern GCC arbitration. Look, tribunals treat bundled, consolidated claims with deep, deep suspicion. If you submit what we call a narrative-only claim, where you essentially just tell a sad, overarching story about regional instability or financial hardship, it is going to fail. You need granular evidence. You have to have baseline program comparisons. You have to prove a direct, undeniable causal link to the critical path. And you must have contemporaneous records proving you actually tried to mitigate the damage. Without all of that, your claim is basically dead on arrival.
So I really want to emphasize exactly why this matters for your day-to-day operations. Procedural weakness remains far more frequently fatal than substantive weakness. Let that sink in for a second. The quality of your administrative discipline, we're talking your notice tracking, your daily records, your project updates, that is literally more important to an arbitrator than the actual severity of the crisis that derailed your project. You could have the most devastating supply chain failure in human history, but if your paperwork is sloppy, you lose. It's as simple as that.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought. The GCC construction sector is going to keep seeing disruptions. That is an absolute guarantee. But your success isn't determined by the event itself. It's determined entirely by how professionally you and your contract respond to it. So I leave you with this question. When the next disruption hits your project tomorrow, and it will, are you going to rely on the event to save you, or are you going to rely on your evidence? It's a stark reminder that upgrading your contract governance is more critical right now than it has ever been. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep building smarter.
Okay,